Hello and welcome to the Columbia Daily Tribune's Courtside View Webcast. This is sports editor Joe Walljasper along with Tribune basketball beat writer Steve Walentik. Steve, Missouri, on the heels of a 77-59 victory over Baylor, has won 4 games in a row. They're now 8-5 in the Big 12 Conference. Just your thoughts on, compared to what they were a few weeks ago when they were 4-5, is this a different team? Is it a team that's playing better, or is it just hit a sweet spot in the schedule and kind of just took care of the games that it was expected to take care of?
Well, I think we first have to acknowledge that it definitely was a sweet spot in the schedule. All you have to do is look at the Big 12 standings, and you see Oklahoma, Texas Tech, and Iowa State down at the bottom, and Missouri got to play them in that order. Baylor, you thought might be a little bit better. I personally was surprised at how close they seemed to one of those teams at the bottom on Wednesday night. Had all kinds of problems turning the ball over, no offensive flow whatsoever. Guys just stood around watching Waste Darius Dunn jack up shots that usually missed the mark, and he wasn't really in any hurry to pass the ball to anybody either. So Baylor obviously struggled, and Missouri took advantage of that and was responsible for a lot of that. But the schedule here these last 2 weeks has definitely favored the Tigers. I do think, though, they are playing a little bit better. There are some signs of encouragement. It seems like Marcus Denman's on another uptick, kind of like he had earlier in the year. I think Missouri's forwards, starting forwards in particular, and Lawrence Bowers and Ricardo Ratliff have really come on the past couple of games, and I think that's big for this team going forward. Kim English, certainly against Baylor, was more patient than we've seen him maybe all year, and it showed up in his stats. He had 16 points, made 4 of 6 threes, and it was just very efficient, didn't try to force anything. I think that's a big positive going forward. The other thing that I think has been good for this team of late is the rotation is kind of more set now than it's been. I know the bench hasn't played as well the last 2 games. They were big against Oklahoma and Texas Tech, but at least Mike Anderson seems like he's settled on a substitution pattern, which guys play well together, and I think that's something that they were searching for a while, and it seems like they've started to get a grasp on that.
The play of the forwards, especially against Iowa State, that was a game where I thought the forwards should have played well because they had kind of an advantage there. But against Baylor, in theory at least, those guys are good players. I mean, one of them is going to be, Perry Jones is going to be a lottery pick, and they really had their way. So that was an encouraging sign, I thought. Like you, I think Baylor is just a team that is just so disinterested in defense that it's hard to take a whole lot from what we saw there, except for the fact that I thought Missouri defensively played a little better than we've seen them play. To hold them in the 50s, that's something I think only once before this year Baylor had scored in the 50s, so that was a pretty solid accomplishment. But as we were talking about, it will get tougher here in these next 3 games to finish the season. Going back, probably dating back to the Oklahoma game, the start of this whole 4-game swing, Justin Safford's been one of the guys that's played a little better. You know, struggles throughout basically the entire season minus the Illinois game up to that point. You can sort of understand some of it. He's coming off an ACL tear. But just from what he's been able to give them the last 4 games, how important is that going forward that they have him coming off the bench and he's not a liability, but a guy who can actually give him a boost?
Well, I think it's hugely important. I think also it's not just that he's played a little bit better. He's really, I mean, it's been night and day. He's averaging 9 points a game the last 4 games. He's shooting over 55% from the floor. That's what you'd like to see out of a senior forward who's got a fair amount of experience, and he should be one of those more efficient players that they have, and he was anything but early in the season. He's cut down on his turnovers. I think he's taking better shots, and the results are there, and I think it's hugely important because number one, to play this system, you got to have more than 2 forwards. I mean, you just have to. Number 2, with those Missouri's starting 2 forwards in particular, both those guys have shown that they're going to get in some foul trouble. They're undersized, and so that leads to some fouling. Mike Anderson's got to have somebody he can count on coming off the bench to give them some minutes, and I just think Safford gives them a lot more than maybe Steve Moore could in terms of an offensive presence. With that second unit, they need another scorer to go with Mike Dixon, who right now is actually struggling with his own shot. I think Safford, of all the second, all the reserves, is probably the most able to be an offensive weapon. And
that's a good point, because he does tend to substitute in 5 at a time with that second unit. And when they're out there, you got Krecklow, Moore, Dixon, Safford and Matt Pressey, and really of that group, Dixon was the only one who was much of a threat to score. So it is important, I think, to get another scorer in that group. And then the other thing with him is, I just don't think he's ever going to be a rebounder. I mean, he's only got about 3 weeks left. I don't think it's going to happen. But it's kind of like what we were talking about with Kim English last week. I think he's another guy that if he kind of puts aside this idea that he's got to get to the rim, he's not a bad mid-range shooter, especially on the baseline there. I think he can kind of help him in that area if he's can find a niche doing that as opposed to turning the ball over so much when he was trying to drive the basket all the time.
Yeah, and, I think he realized that. And I think, it's to his credit that he sort of started to understand that. He said that the Texas game in particular was pretty eye-opening for him. That was, I think, there's no question, his worst game of the season. He had a bunch of turnovers and shot 1 for 10. And he had to play a lot of minutes that night because Bowers obviously got hurt with a concussion and didn't play much. But he really hurt them in a lot of places in that game. And I think he'd been struggling up to that point, and he struggled a couple games after that. But he said, he told me the other day that after that game he went and sat and looked at film and kind of evaluated some of the things that he was doing, and he started to understand that there are things that he used to be able to do with his legs that he's just not able to do right now. And one of those things is be that kind of slashing player, and I think he put himself in a lot of bad spots, trying to put the ball on the floor and dribbling into traffic, and a lot of those plays ended up with him falling to the floor and the ball going the other way. And if he just plays more within himself, and I think he can be a more efficient player and a more effective player.
Missouri now heading into a stretch where they've got 2 road games against kind of defensive-minded teams, Kansas State, Nebraska. These are the kind of games that traditionally I think you kind of think Missouri might struggle at. I mean, being able to kind of dictate the tempo on the road has not been a real strong suit. Do you think they're good enough to go in and win either or both?
Well, we haven't seen it, and so I almost want to reserve judgment. I think the game on Saturday seems really tough to me, just because Kansas State's really playing a lot better. They've won 4 of their last 5 and 5 of their last 7. One of those losses was on a last-second. They had a last-second shot go in that didn't count because it was, 100th of a second late. Otherwise, they'd really be on a tear here. Obviously, they blew out Kansas last week in Manhattan, and that place has been horrible for Missouri the last 6 years. They've lost all 6 times, and usually by pretty wide margins. So I think that game seems pretty tough. Kansas State likes to play as physical as anybody in the Big 12, and I'm not sure that Missouri is. They played better that way against Baylor, but I'm still not sure that they're ready for that challenge in Manhattan.
You might also see a gigantic foul discrepancy, I think.
It's happened before.
Something to watch for.
It's happened before. I think the game on Tuesday in Lincoln seems a little bit more possible. Missouri's had more success there. I think you look at those teams, and Nebraska doesn't have a guy like Jake Pullen who can take over. Missouri, I think, has a talent advantage at most positions. That said, Doc Sadler's team does a good job of making you play the way that they want, and if Missouri's going to just kind of concede to play at Nebraska's pace, it's going to be a close game, and it could go either way. But I think they have a chance certainly to win in Lincoln. They've done it before.
One thing you can say about the Kansas State game was they're not a great ball handling team, so in theory Missouri's press could cause them some troubles. Missouri on the road, their press doesn't cause many people trouble, so we'll see how that goes. But
and if it ends up as you suggested that there's a big foul discrepancy, that certainly limits Missouri's effectiveness with their press.
Okay, there will probably be, I would guess, maybe a slight underdog in all 3 of these games. I don't know. Nebraska game is kind of debatable, but if worse comes to worse, they lose all 3. They finish 8-8 in the Big 12 Conference. Are they a lock for the NCAA Tournament or no?
Seems weird to say, but yes, I think they probably are. This is the weakest I can ever remember the bubble being, and on top of that, you add 3 more teams in the field this year than we had last year. You look at projections that we've seen right now, and Illinois at the beginning of the week was projected by one person as a number 8 seed. They're obviously struggling. After losing to Ohio State the other night, they now have a losing record in the Big Ten. Missouri obviously beat them head-to-head. Old Dominion is another team that seems kind of solidly in the field, or at least has a good shot of getting into the field. That's a team that Missouri really dominated here in Columbia at the end of December. the other thing I think the Tigers have going for them is they don't have any terrible losses. Even the Oklahoma State loss, which to me looks like their worst loss.
It's on the road.
It's on the road, and Oklahoma State, believe it or not, has an RPI right around 50. So that's not going to hurt them too much. I know that Colorado is a little bit lower in the RPI, but I think they've played better and they're going to finish better in the Big 12 standings. I don't think that looks that bad. And the Tigers don't have a lot of great wins, but I think the fact that they've been competitive in a lot of games and haven't really lost too many games that they shouldn't have leaves them in a pretty solid position right now. They have an RPI right in the upper 20s, I believe, and I even with 3 losses down the stretch, I have a hard time believing that with 22 wins in the regular season and a top half of the Big 12 finish, which they'll have, that they're not going to be in the field. They're getting a lot of mileage out of that win over Vanderbilt, too.
All right, well, time for the awkward ending, Steve. Join us again next week when we will be talking about Missouri's 2 road games at K-State and Nebraska, and looking forward to the regular season finale against Kansas.